Hello everyone, it's Breyers and you join me today in this video as I take my first plunge into resculpting model horses. I'm going to be attempting to make this 1/12 classic scale Black Beauty mould horse into a Kelpie from Scottish mythology. It's coming up to Halloween, so I wanted to do something fantasy, and I also thought if I did a fantasy horse, if things started to go a little bit awry, I could probably get away with it. So he's going to be my very first go at resculpting. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to take off his mane, take off his ears, and take off his tail, and then sand those all down. So we've got kind of a starting point for him, and we'll go from there. Okay, so it's a little while later and I've been out having a play with my new Dremel. Again, it's the first time using the Dremel, so I didn't film that because I did need to concentrate. But what I've done is I basically used the cutting disc to cut away the mane and cut off the tail. And I've also cut off the ears, and then I used the sanding drum of the Dremel just to give it a really good sand down. We've sanded off the logo, and he does have a little hole from where I was sanding in his bottom, but that's absolutely fine because I'm going to be putting wire in there to create his new tail as well. So as you can see, he looks a bit weird at the moment. I do think he looks kind of cool hogged though, so I do have another of this body, so I might do a hogged mane version for another custom. But anyway, so first of all, I'm going to start off having just a general little play. I think I might have a go with extending him, making his nostrils more prominent, and doing his ears, as I kind of feel I should do the small parts first. Maybe that's wrong, but just to get them into place and get kind of feel for how I want the model to be before I put on his mane and tail. So I'm going to be making him some little ears that are going to be back to make his expression a bit more menacing, and I'm also planning around his nostrils to make those larger so that he looks like he's flaring his nostrils. So let's have a play. A few hours of working with the epoxy sculpt later, and this is what I have. So I've done a bit of resculpt work around his muzzle, just to try and make his nostrils a bit more flared and a little more scary. We've put on a bit of extra kind of brow, I guess, again to give that kind of more angry looking horse. And I have added on some bits here just because I feel a Kelpie is very unlikely to be a gelding. And I did decide to kind of repair over where there was a little hole just because my wire is actually a little bit thinner than the hole. So I think it would be best to just drill into that instead. So here's what we've got so far. He's a little bit rough looking, and I am fully expecting that at some point I'll have to sand some areas down. But I'm quite pleased with it so far, and considering it's my first time using epoxy, I found it really easy to sculpt with, and it's really nice to work with it in different stages. So a lot of the things like the little wrinkles I popped around his nose, which I'm not sure the camera will pick up, I did a couple of hours into letting the epoxy cure. And then the other thing I managed to do is to create some little ears. They're upside down here, so I was trying to spin them around and they might look a bit more like ears. So these are going to be pinned back. They're certainly not the greatest. This is my very first time trying to sculpt ears, but I think they will look okay when I paint them up and make them black, because they're not going to have too much detail given that they're pointing back as well. And then I've cut some little wire which I'm going to put into the ears once they've cured for the next 24 hours. So this is where I'm stopping today, but I'm super pleased with his progress, and it's really fun just to have a go at doing some sculpting. Drilled in some holes here, and we've got 2 holes for the ears, a new air hole, and I've got 2 holes here for attaching some wire. So it's the next day here, and I've got my little ears, and I'm looking at how I can fix them onto my model. They've nice and dried over 24 hours and cured. So I've cut down these little wires, and what I'm going to do is glue them into these small little holes. And then I'm going to use the good old bicarbonate of soda technique and super glue to try and make a really good firm bond. The ears are now all attached. As you can see, I've put in my super glue and baking soda, and I'm really liking how these look on this model. Okay, so I've now moved on to sculpting the forelock, and as you can see, I'm using this little silicone tool and just creating some indents to try and give some mane texture. Here's it from a little closer up and a little bit further along. And I really like how this epoxy sculpt sculpts into the mane. It's really fun to use. So here we are a bit further through the process of sculpting the forelock, and I've made it really nice and wavy to make sure it looks like it's damp, like the Kelpie's just come out the lock. And so far I'm really happy with how it's going. So I've been working busily on the mane over in sections for the last couple of hours, and this is how it's looking. I really like how it looks really clumpy and matted, and that was the look I kind of wanted for this Kelpie. Here we're onto the wiring stage, so to be able to support the tail I'm inserting some aluminium wire here, and again I'm attaching it using some baking soda and some super glue. After wiring the tail, I then made this construct of some sticky masking tape just to provide a bit more support for sculpting onto. Next up here is the finished side of the mane, and we're starting to sculpt the tail. So I started at the base of the tail, just trying to add in some herring detail and making sure there's a really good strong connection to the body so that it wouldn't snap. A bit later on, and here's our tail progress. I've been working on the tail in sections so that I don't smudge the previous section, and been really working on getting that herring detail so far. And here we've almost completed the tail. I'm just on the last sections, and I thought I'd show you how these silicone tools work. So essentially I just get them slightly wet and then just gently press into the epoxy, and I can create some nice waves which make really nice fine hair detail. So it's quite a therapeutic process actually. I really enjoy doing this bit. Here we are at the end of the sculpt work, and I'm really happy with how this has turned out for my very first sculpt. The tail seems to be really nice and secure and not cracking, and overall I don't think it's too bad. It's not perfect, but not bad. The moment of truth, we've just put on our first little light primer, and as you can see there are some seams, so I'm going to have to do some sanding here and get everything nice and flat. Okay, finished priming now, and I may still have a few bits that aren't perfect, but I am happy enough with him to move on to the acrylic base coat. So I'm going to mix up some blacky green colour just to give him kind of a dark base coat. And Mowgli, my cat, says hi. Here we are after doing the acrylic base coats. This probably took about 10 very fine acrylic layers, and as you can see it's this really kind of deep greeny black. Oops, I almost dropped him there. We spin him around. It looks very black unless you're up close. It's really quite difficult to discern the green, but I quite like that because it's not too in your face. Moving on now to pasteling, and I'm starting off by getting some more black in with my black pan pastel just to create some darker areas of shading. Here we are applying the pastel, so I just use essentially some makeup brushes that I bought to apply pastel, and I'm mainly colouring in the top line here, which is going to be one of the darker parts of the model. I'm just gently patting on some pan pastel. I then realised the green wasn't showing through as much as I'd like, so I ground down a green pastel stick and started applying that to sort of the flank and shoulder areas, again just to give a bit of contrast. I did want him to have some green, but I wanted it to be subtle. Now you can see that green really starting to shine through on top of that greeny black acrylic coat, and just giving him a bit of contrast really. Back to acrylics to paint in the tail here. I'm just painting it black at this stage. Here I am also popping on some acrylic onto the mane, just starting to get that detail in now and really appreciate the sculpting coming to life. A bit further along again in the process, so I've done the mane, and now what I'm doing is adding in actually a green wash into the tail. It will dry a lot clearer than that, but I think it will just give again some contrast to the acrylics to make this pony extra spooky. The hooves have been painted with a grey acrylic, and I'm just adding on a bit of pastel now, just because I find it helps smooth out the texture of the hooves. So after I feel happy with all those details, I needed to seal the horse to make sure that pastel work all stayed on board. So I reached for my favourite sealer, which is the Army Painter Matte Varnish, and I did take this horse out and spray him outside. I also realised as I was tidying up that I am definitely a messy creator. And here we have it. This is the final custom. This is the Kelpie. So starting off his head, he's got some red detail in his nose. He's got these white zombie-like eyes. We can see the green showing up here quite nicely in those areas where I added it in with some pastel. Here he is underneath. and I'm really happy with this guy. I love how spooky he looks. He looks really eerie, and that was the look I really wanted for him. I actually think I like his offside better. I like the sculpting on the mane a little bit better on this side. And I love his tail from this angle as well. He just looks so angry and I love it. I could really imagine him coming out of the lock to come and try and drown people, which is what Kelpies typically do. Yeah, he was a really fun custom and I really think he was a great one to start with. What I'll also do is show you him with the original model. Here he is with the original Black Beauty mould, and you can see just how much of a difference a little bit of resculpting can make. I hope you've enjoyed seeing how the Kelpie was created, and I wish you a very happy Halloween wherever you are. Bye bye!